Hello, everyone. My name is Stephanie Boozer. I am happy to welcome you to today's CUGC user share webinar. And it looks like, actually, I just realized didn't start sharing my screen. There we go. All right, so yep, like I said, welcoming you to today's user share webinar. We have our EUC State of the Union with Marius Sandbu. I am very excited to hear what all he has to say. I know he has a super packed agenda. If some of you guys saw it on Twitter, he has lots of stuff out there that he's going to go through today and can't wait to hear it. But before we get to that, I have a couple of housekeeping details for you. We are recording today's webinar, and you will receive a link to that recording in an email tomorrow. The email is going to come directly from GoToWebinar, so be on the lookout for that. Also, we'd like for you to submit your questions anytime you have them. We're going to take some, during the presentation, and then some after the presentation. It's going to kind of depend on what your questions are. So, but just type them in as you have them, and we'll keep an eye on those and as we go. And also at the end of the webinar, I'm going to throw a link in the chat window for you. It's a link to a survey. It's just for CUGC use only. We like to hear your feedback on all of our webinars to help us plan for future webinars. So just be on the lookout for that. All right, so moderating all of your questions for us today is James Rankin. He is a Citrix technology professional. He is on the UK CUGC steering committee, and I don't know if you caught his webinar last week, but he is a frequent presenter for CUGC. James, would you like to say hello?
I would. Sorry, I just had a mouthful of mince pie there. My apologies. Everybody knows, well, anybody in the EUC space is probably familiar with Marius's blogs and articles and whatnot. I certainly am, having read lots of them down over the years. And so, yeah, just a lovely opportunity to distract yourself from all that coronavirus stuff and infect yourself with some technical knowledge instead. That's what we're here for today. It sounds great.
Thank you, James. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to hand things over to Marius. Marius is been a member of CUGC for quite some time. He's a member of the Norway CUGC group, and you can find him on Twitter at Sandbu. Marius, I know you've done a lot of content for us at CUGC in the networking area, and I know that cloud has been a big focus of yours, so I'm really excited to get to what you have for us today. So with that, I am going to hand the screen over to you to get us going.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Here it comes.
So let's make sure that we share the right screen. So just give me a little wink when you see this, see the presentation.
That looks good.
See it.
Yeah, thanks. So welcome to the webinar, everybody. So when I planned this webinar, I was essentially trying to make a summary of what's been going on the last year in terms of end-user computing space, because there's been a lot of development in terms of new functionality and changes and new products that has been popping up from different vendors. I wanted to do sort of a summary of what's been going on. So, of course, a little bit about myself. I work as a cloud technical lead at a company based out of Norway called Tietoevry. Working now mostly on public cloud related projects, often in the space between public cloud and end user computing. So a lot of VDI in public cloud, security and identity and so on. When I'm not at work, I typically sit in front of the computer at home because I lack any social life. So I do a lot of blogging, content and community-based webinars and conferences and so on. Not going to be so many conferences the next couple of months anyway, but happy to be here now to talk a little bit about what's been going on in the end-user computing space the last year. And I also want to touch a little bit upon what's been happening so far in 2020. Even though that a lot of the different vendors in this space have been doing a lot of product rebranding, so I'm not going to talk so much about that, but more from a technical content, so what's new and what's changed. And to be honest, the content is, well, I last updated this a couple of days ago, and to be honest, it might be some changes or some additions that are missing from the agenda. So what am I going to be talking about for the next hour or so? A lot of different content, talking a little bit about Windows Virtual Desktop, what's new there, what is VMware and Citrix doing in this area, making all the different updates that have been coming to Microsoft Teams and OneDrive, and what VMware and Citrix are doing there. Talk a little bit about MicroApps from Citrix, what it is and what it can do, and also how it integrates with the ecosystem that Citrix is now building. Talking about Endpoint Manager, what's new in the latest version of LTSR releases, MSI AppAttach, and also touch a little bit upon the different updates that have been going on within Microsoft Azure and Google Cloud, and what's been going on there from a Citrix perspective, and a little bit upon Office 365, because there's been a lot of changes there as well. And also now Microsoft's been releasing a new browser and how that fits into the end user computing space. And lastly, talk a little bit about networking with SD-WAN and virtual WAN, and talk about security and zero trust. So I also want to mention that if there's something that I missed from the agenda, like some big announcement or some new product, please let me know, because I plan to write a summary as a blog post and post it on my CUGC afterwards. I would love to have any feedback that you have that something that I'm missing out. So of course, while I have your attention, and well, most of us, I guess, has been busy the last 6 months patching. There's been a lot of big vulnerabilities from a lot of different vendors. We had one within Citrix NetScaler. We had a big one within Fortinet VPN client, the Pulse VPN client. We had a vulnerability in the Microsoft Remote Desktop Gateway Services components. And we had the Cisco Discovery Protocol, which had its high severity vulnerability, which was published in February. And then we have the big one, which came 2 days ago, which is vulnerability in the SMB3 protocol, which affects the latest SMB protocol, which is only in Windows Server 2019 and Windows 10. So of course, this patch has now been released from Microsoft, but I see that there's already being exploited out in the wild. So I see a lot of conversation dialogue on it on Twitter. So I highly urge you to patch this as soon as possible. But again, you see that now that we see a lot more of these big or high severity based vulnerabilities being discovered. So it also needs us to make some drastic changes how we actually are going to be publishing or making these types of services available for our end users. And also, while I have your attention, so Microsoft now is going to make some changes to the use of traditional unsigned LDAP. So I know that a lot of consultants have been using NetScaler LDAP bindings towards port 389 unencrypted unsigned LDAP bindings towards Active Directory. Now with this new patch, it means that Microsoft will stop or shut down, so it doesn't, those ports and that LDAP binding won't work on Active Directory anymore. So this initial patch was actually scheduled for March, but it's now being pushed towards later this year. So hopefully you'll spend this time moving forward to actually figure out if you have any services or network services that actually use this port 389 towards Active Directory. And if you have to make some changes so it uses signed LDAP bindings instead. One of the big announcements that came during 2019 was the release of Windows Virtual Desktop. And Windows Virtual Desktop was Microsoft's way into delivering VDI as a service in Azure. So they have tried this previously with something they called Azure Remote App. It didn't turn out to be as successful as they wanted to, so they took it back from the market. And they've made some changes. So what they actually did is that they started creating a new service or a new edition of remote desktop services called Rdmi, so Remote Desktop Modern Infrastructure. And the idea here was that the different RDP components, so web access, gateway, connection broker, and the connection database was going to be delivered as Azure platform services, where each customer needed to set up those platform services within their Azure subscription. and then you can host the different VDI components in the backend. So you wouldn't need to have any virtual machines hosting those main components, if you will. So what Microsoft did after Rdmi, they actually took the components back and said, okay, we'll deliver these services as multi-tenant managed services instead. So Microsoft now delivers the control plane and the data plane with Windows Virtual Desktop. And then you can have your own virtual machines, so the VDI sessions in the backend. So that's the only thing that you control as part of Windows Virtual Desktop. So all the traffic flow from the client side is going from a Windows Virtual Desktop client, going into the gateway component that Microsoft is managing, and then connecting backend to one or more VDI servers that are connected to Windows Virtual Desktop. Now, as part of this, Microsoft also acquired a company called Fslogic, which is used to actually handle profile management, especially for Office 365 users, so managing Outlook profiles, Teams, and so on. Another big change that Microsoft did was actually provide support for multi-user Windows 10. So it actually allows you to have a Windows or a machine running Windows 10 with multiple users logged onto the same machine. And this is, from a licensing perspective, now only allowed to run in Microsoft Azure. So of course, Windows Virtual Desktop as a service, it is free for Microsoft for customers that have the following licenses. So there's a lot of different licenses entitlements that give you access to Windows Virtual Desktop, and you only pay for the other infrastructure components that you might have, so any file servers or the VDI servers themselves. And as part of the license entitlement, you also get access to FSLogix software and the profile containers, Office 365 containers, and so on. There is something you need to be aware of, is that Microsoft and Azure has 56 different regions around the world as it is now, but the control and the data plane for Windows Virtual Desktop is not available in all those different regions. So it means that traffic flow goes from a client to the closest data plane where it is for different regions. So for instance, here in Norway, the closest one in West Europe, and then it goes backwards to communicate with the agent, which might be stored somewhere else. So when we did some initial testing in the early preview days, where the gateway component was only running in US-based data center, we had about 250 milliseconds latency. So the client went from the client to the gateway component in the US, back to our infrastructure in West Europe, and going back the same path. So it wasn't optimized at the time, but Microsoft is constantly rolling out to support new regions. And they also have a website now which allows you to do some form of assessment. It will measure the latency between your browser or where the user is sitting and the closest Windows Virtual Desktop gateway. So coming from Citrix and VMware background and working with Horizon and CNAP and CDesktop and all those different flavors there, we saw that Windows Virtual Desktop is missing some central components or central features. One of these is specifically around image provisioning, so managing lifecycle management of your golden images. This is not something that you actually have as part of Windows Virtual Desktop, so you would need to use some other form of tooling. So you can use Packer or Azure Image Builder as an option. That's essentially that you have a configuration file where you specify what the image should have, what kind of operating system, what kind of software should be installed as part of the image as well. Now, initially, Windows Virtual Desktop was also missing some form of auto scale mechanism. So actually allows you to scale virtual machines up and down depending on a time schedule or depending on the amount of users that you have. So they recently released a new feature which allows you to actually do the scaling automatically, but this came out in February, so it's been a couple of months, but it didn't have that type of feature. Secondly, when it comes to like proper management tools, like you're used to using Citrix Studio and Citrix Director, you don't have that type of functionality yet as part of Windows Virtual Desktop. You have some PowerShell commandlets that you can use to actually make some disconnect user, reset user connection, and so on, but it's still lacking in terms of management capabilities. And also when it comes to managing applications and providing some form of application layering method, the answer that Microsoft has here is something called they call MSIX AppAttach, which I'll come back to a little bit later slide. And of course, since the connection is using TCP web-based socket connection and the way the traffic is being routed, I don't think that Windows Virtual Desktop is yet ready yet to actually handle all the heavy GPU-based workloads. But I also know that Microsoft is working on to optimize that type of, or optimize the traffic flow. Another thing that initially, when Windows Virtual Desktop was released, was the missing in the ecosystem of support from thin clients and so on. But right now, I know that IGEL is one of the few vendors that support Windows Virtual Desktop with a Linux client. And there are also other vendors that have their thin clients running Windows 10 IoT, which also supports Windows Virtual Desktop as of now. One of the great things about just specifically this community is there's been a lot of work being done to actually fix those limitations that Windows Virtual Desktop has had right now. I know that a fellow MVP based out of the Netherlands, Marcel Maurer, has been creating a lot of tools that you can use to actually do management of Windows Virtual Desktop, which he calls Windows Virtual Desktop Admin UI. He also created a new option similar to what Citrix had in Smart Scale, which he calls My Smart Scale. He's also created an Azure Monitor integration to actually monitor Citrix and RDS environments in Azure, and also Windows Virtual Desktop. And I also added this little extra component yesterday because I saw Bram Wolf actually published connection experience indicator for Windows Virtual Desktop. So it's essentially gives information inside a session to show what kind of latency and what kind of bandwidth and what's the overall experience for the end user. So luckily, they have a lot of great support from the community. So what is Citrix and VMware doing? Of course, both of them have been announcing that they're going to be supporting Windows Virtual Desktop. And when they mean supporting, it doesn't mean they're actually integrating into the control and the data plane that Microsoft has. It only means that they actually support delivering multi-user Windows 10. So it's a little bit of a marketing statement, to be honest. It's more about providing support from the licensing perspective because they have their own, VMware and Citrix have their own control plane and data plane, so they don't integrate with what Microsoft has at all. In addition to this, Citrix also created their own desktop as a service offering, which I'll also come back to a little bit later. But essentially, it means that Citrix is delivering the entire ecosystem, the entire value chain. So providing the data plane, control plane, and also managing the VDI service sessions as well. And then we have MSIX AppAttach. And of course, Microsoft has stated that they're no longer developing AppV. So that's the answer moving forward for Microsoft is going to be MSIX AppAttach. And AppAttach is essentially somewhat similar functionality to AppV, to be honest. When I published this agenda, I got an email from Timothy Mangan, which is one of the AppV gurus in the community, and he said that MSIX AppAttach is nowhere near in terms of app compatibility compared to AppV. So he actually has, I've added a link here to a scorecard which he created, which actually shows what kind of features is AppAttach missing compared to AppV. So of course, if you are a big enterprise and been investing a long time in AppV-based packaging, you're going to have a hard time to actually convert those applications into MSIX AppAttach applications. That's my guess, at least. So AppAttach essentially just wrapping applications in an MSIX package or format, and it's going to be created as a VHD or VHDX package. As of now, it's only supported for Windows 10, and you mount those images or those applications using PowerShell. Now, another funny side to this is that Microsoft initially also had something they call the Windows or the Microsoft Store for Business, where essentially it's the application portal for, or the app store for Windows 10, or the latest Windows editions at least, where they could actually publish MSIX packages. But now they actually said that they're going to be shutting down this service soon.
Actually, Marius, can I just jump in there because I've got a couple of questions around AppAttach. Obviously, somebody's asking, is it not going to have application isolation, which I think is probably right. But also, Rick's asking, is it going to be supported on a Windows Server OS?
Is it going to be supported on the Windows OS? So as of now, it's
Server OS. Sorry,
Server OS. Okay, yeah. Well, I've tried to ask the product team when I was at Ignite last year, and I didn't get indication that's going to be supported for server at all. That was at least the indication I got at that time.
So I guess it probably ties in with the Windows 10 multi-session. It'll be the target for that then.
Yeah, and to be honest, from Microsoft perspective, like if they can push Windows 10 multi-user, and from licensing perspective, you can only run it in Azure. So of course, they're actually pushing those use cases directly into Azure.
All right, cool, got it.
And then we have Citrix managed desktops, which I mentioned is like when Citrix Cloud was released, Citrix actually only had the management plane as part of Citrix Cloud, and then you have the cloud connectors which connect into on-premises environments, and you can do management from the management plane in Citrix Cloud. With managed desktop, it actually allows you to set up a full environment within Citrix managed subscription. And then you can connect that subscription or those the VDA servers directly into your own environment using VNet peering as part of Azure. So VNet peering essentially connecting to virtual networks in Azure. So you can use Citrix's own subscription, or you can use your own Azure subscription. And you also have two options if you want to do domain join, essentially that if you want to join the VDAs to your existing Active Directory domain, or you can choose to use non-domain joined within a Citrix managed subscription. And if you use non-domain joined, you also get full single sign-on directly from any type of identity provider that is part of Citrix Cloud. And I also just recently noticed that Citrix have created their own cost calculator, which you can use to actually get a cost indication of what it's going to cost for X amount of users.
Got a question there. Sorry to jump in. Does any other vendor support non-domain joined systems?
To be honest, I'm not sure.
Right, fair enough. Just thought I'd get an answer because I didn't know either.
No. And then we had a lot of updates to Microsoft Teams and OneDrive. One of the big things that Microsoft did is essentially that they allow now for per machine installation for both OneDrive and Microsoft Teams. And they also now allow support for running Office 365 Pro Plus on 2019. I know that initially they said that they weren't going to be supporting Pro Plus on 2019 server, but they made a change because a lot of demand from the community, I guess. And another cool thing is that OneDrive for Business has had for some time a feature called Files on Demand. So instead of syncing all the data down, you just get a shortcut or a symlink object in the File Explorer, and all the data is going to be read directly from Office 365. And this is now also supported for Server 2019 as well. So instead of all the hassle with the profile containers and setting up an additional file server to actually sync the data down, you can just turn on Files on Demand. Or if you want to set up synchronization, you can also use FSLogix to actually handle the profile instead. Now, Citrix has had something they call Optimization Pack, which has been available for Skype for Business. But when Microsoft released Teams, that functionality started working. Now, the Optimization Pack is used to actually do offloading of audio and video content from within the server session down to the end client itself. But Citrix and Microsoft have been working together and actually developed a new optimization pack for Teams, which is now supported in the 1906 release. And VMware is also working on a similar type of functionality, but it's currently in beta.
Actually, I don't know that I should jump in here today. I noticed that Teams offloading just enabled itself for me today on my Citrix Cloud session, which I found it's kind of enabled by default. So it was quite surprising, but it was quite good as well that it started doing that just off the bat. So it took the load off my XenApp servers.
And I also know that it's now enabled, I think I have a find on it, but it's now enabled by default on the latest LTSR release as well.
Cool.
And then we have Citrix Workspace MicroApps. And for me, this was an interesting company when they acquired a company called Sapo. Now, of course, we've been working a long time with actually publishing applications to our users, so actually publishing an application. So we have the storefront of the workspace, we have access to all the different applications, but essentially the users just want to have access to do certain tasks within certain applications. So applying or approving an invoice or filling out an expense report or something instead of going into all the application, all the different components in there. Now, what MicroApps, the intention is to actually publish actions and notifications from the application, not the application itself. And they've built a framework which allows us to integrate with a lot of different web-based applications using REST APIs or a combination with JSON. And the MicroApp service now has a lot of pre-built-in integrations with, well, the more common SaaS services, so SAP, G Suite, ServiceNow, Workday, and so on. Still missing some integration points, especially with Office 365 and so on, but guessing just a matter of time before they come with those type of connectors as well. I also find that documentation is still a bit lacking, but to be honest, I didn't search that hard for documentation, but guessing it's still in the starting phases. Of course, it makes sense, right? This is just an example of what I shamelessly copied from Citrix. Essentially, just then you have the you can publish actions instead of the application as well, so you can make it a lot easier for the end users to actually do certain tasks. Now, and the second step of this is that, like, we see more and more like use of virtual assistants. Citrix has their own Citrix virtual assistant, which is integrating into the MicroApp service. So you can publish the same actions which you've already built in a MicroApp, either directly into a Workspace app or into Microsoft Teams. So you can do a dialogue-based action instead of clicking around in the application portal or in the Workspace application portal as well. And VMware has done something similar. So they have something they call, which is, well, probably the worst name I've ever heard, VMware Workspace One Intelligent Hub Virtual Assistant. But again, they have the same type of approach. They have a chatbot service which connects into different connectors and to other third-party applications. But one thing difference here is they're integrating with the IBM Watson library to actually make it a little bit more fluent dialogue. So it's much easier to understand different keywords as part of the conversation. But again, the VMware service is only part of their ecosystem. As of now, it doesn't integrate any other types of components such as Microsoft Teams, which I think is a shame. But in addition to this, now Microsoft has their own agenda, and they're also building something they call virtual agents, which is pretty much leveraging the Microsoft Flow and the Microsoft Logic app ecosystem, and it has a bunch of data connectors that it can use. And they've also added some form of RPA functionality, so robotics functions in Azure or Office 365, I mean. And that also allows us to do automation against legacy applications where we might not have any web services or web integrations that we can connect to. And of course, Microsoft has a similar feature. This allows us, so this is just an example of the UI where you can click and drag what kind of interactions, what kind of expressions, or what kind of responses which should trigger certain automation tasks. And then you can also integrate this into Microsoft Teams as well. And I believe that, well, as of now, Microsoft has the upper hand because they have a lot more different connectors or pre-built connectors in place compared to what VMware and Citrix has. So it's going to be interesting to see how this evolves moving forward. Now, I said I'm not going to talk too much about marketing, but Microsoft made a big announcement during Microsoft Ignite last year that they're actually going to be merging Intune and Configuration Manager into a single product called Endpoint Manager. Now, again, more of a marketing and from a licensing perspective, but still going to be individual consoles. But we see now that more and more services that Microsoft is adding to Configuration Manager is more hybrid cloud-based services. So we have Autopilot, which is the new white glove deployment of Windows devices. Desktop Analytics is a cloud service collecting information telemetry data from Windows 10 devices. Co-management, and now as part of the latest release of Configuration Manager, the last technical preview at least, they have a lot more cloud-based functionality as well. And now they're actually building a new admin center as part of Microsoft 365, which is now going to replace the Intune management console and also going to be used moving forward for Configuration Manager. So it's going to be a lot of changes here in the next couple of months. So what about mobile devices? Of course, there's been a lot of development both on the endpoint product that Citrix has from VMware and also from Microsoft. But this is the one thing that caught my eye, is that Microsoft now has announced that they're actually going to be providing antivirus software on iOS and Android as part of the product they have, which is called Microsoft Defender Adp. So Microsoft has had Defender Adp for some time, only focusing on Windows clients, and is now available for Windows Server, and they have now released a client for Mac as well. Now they come with Linux, coming with preview for Linux, and they announced this at the RSA conference a couple of weeks ago. So it's going to be interesting to see that Microsoft is now going to be covering the entire ecosystem in terms of endpoints. And also, in addition to this, now VMware acquired a company called Carbon Black, which also focuses on endpoint protection. So it's going to be a tough battle here between what Microsoft has and what VMware is going to be focusing on moving forward. So of course, I couldn't skip this webinar without talking about what's new in the latest LTSR release. And as you mentioned, James, we have the Teams optimization now enabled by default. EDT is enabled by default, so all traffic will flow using UDP as well. And they've also added a couple of new features. One of these is application protection, which is a feature which is available for Mac and Windows devices. So essentially, it provides anti-key logging and anti-screen capture functionality. So let's say that you start a Citrix session on a device or from a Windows device, and you log into a Citrix session and try to do a screenshot. The Workspace app is going to scramble the screenshot, so you don't actually have any content when the screenshots. You just get a blank screenshot. The second part is something they called user personalization layer. Now, I haven't tried this myself, to be honest, but again, the interesting part here is that this is functionality coming from the app layering product, but it's built into machine creation services. So the interesting thing here is that, well, is Citrix now merging application layering functionality into machine creation services instead? Because this is essentially just mounting a user profile using VHD or VHDX into a session real time. So of course, as part of the latest LTSR release, they also support Windows Server 2019, browser content redirection, integrated into VDA, flash redirection is gone. The last part caught my eye a couple of days ago is that within Citrix now, you've had the option within Studio and machine creation services to connect to a public cloud solution. So you can connect to GCP, AWS, Microsoft Azure, and also do provisioning of virtual machines directly from within Citrix Studio. Now, Citrix has said that this LTSR release is going to be the last release that actually has this functionality, or the integration at least, supported configuration. So within the next CR release, which is coming soon, I guess, we'll still have the option to do integrations with cloud, but it's going to be in unsupported configuration. So the feature is going to work fine, I guess, but no new functionality is going to be added to the on-premises product. Going to be focusing directly into Citrix Cloud instead. Of course, we can't talk about all the updates without talking about what's happening on the print side. And the reason why I just added this is because I'm working on a lot of projects now, especially around smaller clients moving towards public cloud and want to use Azure Act Trajectory. And of course, they want to have as few servers as possible. So how can we get rid of the print server, to be honest? Now, Microsoft announced this a couple of weeks ago, but actually setting up something they called Universal Print Server in Azure. So it essentially replaces a virtual machine running print server. It's integrated into Azure Act Trajectory, so you can set up permissions using that instead. And also going to replace the old hybrid print offering that they used to have, which didn't work at all. Took some time to actually get up and running. So this is going to be interesting to see how it works. But it is in preview now, so you can actually sign up and give it a go. Application layering. There's been a lot of support changes here as well in terms of support for latest operating system versions. VMware jumped to version 4, which also gives us a little bit more simplified view how we can manage certain additions or different versions of a specific package. So you have the root object now, which is an application. You can have different versions of the package in addition to this. Of course, same applies for application layering, support for latest versions, still Silverlight console. Again, then my question comes up if they're actually moving functionality from application layering into MCS. One of the biggest functionality, or the biggest feature that was added, is that you can now assign application layers to different operating system layers. So you don't need to have an application layer specifically for one OS layer. You can have one across multiple. I still think it is a little bit experimental feature, I think. I'm not sure if it's in full supported configuration yet, but it's something as part of the latest release at least. Citrix Cloud updates. From a service provider perspective, the biggest announcement was multi-tenant Citrix Cloud, which just came a couple of months ago. And when Citrix Cloud was released initially, it didn't have a lot of APIs and was missing a lot of PowerShell functionality as well. But we see now that Citrix is building more and more APIs directly into Citrix Cloud, and you can access the API or get documentation from the API perspective going into developercloud.com. And also we have the Rendezvous protocol. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but this is a protocol that is used in combination. So let's say that you are using the NetScaler gateway as a service. So traffic flow will go from the client to the NetScaler gateway service that Citrix has, down to the cloud connector, and then back to the VDA servers. So this, of course, puts a lot of traffic on the cloud connectors. But using this protocol, the VDAs will talk directly to the NetScaler gateway service, so bypassing the cloud connector. And now the cloud connector is the server which communicates between your environment and Citrix Cloud. So the cloud connector was something that Citrix were doing maintenance on and constantly updating according to their schedule. But now with the latest version, you can actually specify your own maintenance windows. You know when the cloud connectors are going down or when they're being updated or patched. And as part of Citrix Cloud now, as part of Studio there, they've also added something they call Autoscale, which replaces the old Smart Scale solution, which was part of Smart Tools. And this allows us to do actually more, define more granular different schedules within Citrix Studio. So especially if you're running infrastructure in public cloud where you pay per second for a virtual machine, using Autoscale, you can specify that virtual machines should only be online between 8 and 5, especially, well, in these days, they probably need to be available all the time and much larger scale. And it can also scale depending on the amount of users that actually log on to the session. Of course, there's a lot of other Citrix Cloud updates that have been added, but I didn't catch all the information. But one of the things I want to mention is that based upon what I've seen now, so Citrix Intelligent Traffic Management is now currently end of sale, based upon the public websites. So I'm guessing that's going to be removed sometime in the future from the Citrix Cloud Management Console as well. That's a shame because it was a really good solution. Of course, identity, there's a lot of stuff happening here. So Citrix Cloud is now support, well, in preview for Okta, and it has support for Azure Act Trajectory so an end user can authenticate to Citrix Cloud or Citrix Workspace using the Azure Act Trajectory user. And if you combine this with federated authentication service, you can also get single sign-on directly into the VDA server or into the VDA session. Now, from a Microsoft perspective, there's a lot of stuff happening here. Right now, they have support for FIDO authentication, so you can authenticate using a YubiKey or any type of security key which supports that common standard. And up until now, it's only been supported natively for Azure Active Directory. But a couple of days ago, or 1 week ago, Microsoft actually announced public preview for using FIDO authentication in hybrid modes. Essentially, you can authenticate to your on-premises environment or traditional Active Directory using your authentication keys or security keys. It's really interesting to see all the different innovations here that Microsoft is doing on Azure Active Directory. And then we have on the public cloud side, there's been a lot of updates on Azure and Google at least, which I want to talk a little bit more about. One of the things that was announced a couple of days ago is that Microsoft and together with AMD now has published a new set of virtual machine types, specifically the NVV4 series, which is powered by AMD-based CPU and AMD-based GPU. Now, this functionality leverages something called GPU partitioning, which is similar to the MX GPU feature, which has been available for traditional hypervisors for some time. So it's a hardware-based solution using SR-IOV to actually partition the graphic card or the physical GPU card into different types of profiles within virtual machines. So these are now available from West Europe and also data center US, can't remember which one. Now, if you are also moving towards using Microsoft Azure more and more, there's a lot of functionality now that you can use to actually replace your traditional file servers. So you have Azure NetApp Files, which supports traditional SMB-based file storage. You have Azure Files, which is also another SMB file storage solution. Up until now, there's been some limitations when it comes to Azure Files and support for traditional NTFS-based access permissions. But they actually announced that they have support now in public preview for integrating Azure Files directly into Active Directory. So you can set up a file service without actually having to set up a virtual machine to actually host the file service. The last part is Azure Active Directory or as part of Azure VPN Gateway, which is a traditional site-to-site, point-to-site VPN gateway solution in Azure, which has up until now only supported certificate-based authentication or radius-based authentication, as now native support for Azure Active Directory instead, or in addition to the other types of authentication solutions. There's also been a lot of updates to Google Cloud, and Google Cloud is, well, actually my preferred platform. It's a lot faster, a lot more stable compared to what I experience in Azure. And I know that Citrix is now has been building or working on to integrate with machine creation services now. So this is enabled and available in Citrix Cloud. They've also added auto scaling to work now against Google Cloud. And now we actually also have the option to actually deploy SD-WAN appliances or the NetScaler or the ADC appliance, which is now available in the Google Marketplace as well. And a couple of weeks ago, so Google also announced that they are delivering now managed service for Active Directory and Microsoft SQL as managed services instead of you building your own virtual infrastructure to actually manage or deliver those capabilities. So then we have Office 365, not so much here, which I haven't already talked about, but one of the new capabilities that is coming is something called Application Guard for Office. So Application Guard is a security feature which has previously been part of Microsoft Edge. So what it actually does is that when you open up a website in an Application Guard tab or menu, it will actually create an isolated container on the underlying virtual machine on the operating system itself. Now, this is going to be a feature which is coming to Microsoft Office as well, which means that if you open up an unknown document containing macros or something like that, it's going to be opened up in its own isolated virtual machine. So you can see the documentation, but it's not going to be able to interact with the underlying operating system. Another option, another new feature that has been available now is that because Microsoft is constantly adding more and more Office 365 regions around the world. So as of now, you can actually move your tenant to a closer location. So I've added a link here, and it lists out what kind of locations are available for moving. So let's say we have had some customers which have, when they set up their Office 365 tenant, they didn't actually consider the aspect of where was this actually going to be placed around the world. But with this, you can actually store the data or move the data to a closer location, which will also affect the latency and how OneDrive is going to be working and so on. The third thing is that Microsoft Teams is now available for Linux as in its own application or its own software. And as part of Microsoft Ignite last year, Microsoft is now also starting to roll out Azure or MFA as part of all the different Azure Act Trajectory subscription levels. It's going to be a free service for everyone, regardless if you're using Azure Act Trajectory Basic or not. Now, I also want to mention a little bit about Microsoft Edge, the new one essentially, which is based upon Chromium, which I've been using as my main browser now for some time, because it actually gives a combination of the functionality and the speed and performance of Google Chrome, and combining this with the management capabilities that Microsoft has been adding, and also Application Guard. Now, the only thing missing from this now is a specific setting called roaming profile location, which is not available as a policy yet in Microsoft Edge, but it is coming. But there's a lot of customization that we can do on this specific browser, and it has a lot more security because you can also add Application Guard as part of it. I've also written a blog post summarizing all these different configurations that you can do on Microsoft Edge. And then we have SD-WAN and virtual WAN. Again, SD-WAN is, there's a lot of vendors mentioning SD-WAN. Essentially, it's just about how we optimize traffic flow from a location to another location or to a service. Of course, I know that both Citrix and VMware with VeloCloud have been doing a lot of innovation and developing new functionality with their products, especially integrating natively now with Microsoft's Azure Virtual WAN solution, and also integrating directly with Office 365 to optimize where the traffic should break out and go directly to internet. They also integrate directly with the Microsoft REST API to collect all the new IP addresses which Microsoft are using at any given time. Now, Azure Virtual WAN is another solution which is available in Azure. Now, this service allows us, so it's a traditional, you can think about it as a site-to-site solution. So you can connect different branches directly into Microsoft Azure, but the traffic from a branch location, so Microsoft has 56 regions around the world. The traffic is going to flow from the branch office to the closest Microsoft region, and then using Microsoft's backbone to communicate across to the location on the other side. So of course, if you combine this with an SD-WAN solution, and we did some testing on this, so we compared it to traditional MPLS from the existing provider, traditional internet, and we combined this with SD-WAN and integrated with Azure Virtual WAN, and we saw that was a huge difference in terms of what kind of latency we could expect, specifically comparing this with traditional internet. Then, of course, we have Zero Trust, and as I mentioned initially, there's been a lot of big vulnerabilities now coming up as of late, and I'm guessing I'm guessing it's just going to be the tip of the iceberg. I'm guessing we're going to see a lot more of these big severity vulnerabilities moving forward. And we also see a lot of vendors now pushing something they call Zero Trust. So essentially, it's about always validating where the user is connecting from. So regardless of if the user is sitting on the inside of your network or on the outside, you always need to validate the user and what the user is actually doing. So constantly validating what the user and the client is actually trying to do. So of course, in order to do this, you need to have type of machine learning functionality to try to detect what's actually normal and not normal behavior. So Citrix has added this as a feature into something they call Citrix Analytics. VMware is working into this into something they call Workspace One Trust Network. Then we have all the features within the Microsoft ecosystem, so Defender Adp, Sentinel, and Cloud App Security and Collision Access. But of course, none of these will cover the entire aspect, because if you use Citrix and use all of the Microsoft components, you're not going to get any indication of what's actually going on in the Citrix session. If you use Citrix Analytics and you try to access Office 365, the analytics engine in Citrix is not going to detect if there's a malicious user trying to gain access to Office 365. So what Citrix is doing with their Citrix Analytics for security, they actually integrate now into the Microsoft Graph Security API to actually collect threat intelligence information from Microsoft and feed that information into Citrix Analytics. And with that, they can actually, well, see more of the data across the different data sources and make even more educated guesses on what's actually going on. And then they can take more or better guesses and take actions accordingly to what is the user actually doing. So it's going to be interesting to see here what kind of integrations, like what VMware is going to be doing with Microsoft, and what Citrix is also going to be to expand the portfolio and integrating with other data sources that Microsoft might have. So now I've gotten to the end of my session. I just want to mention some other great community work that you want to catch up on. First one is the bite-sized book, which was an initiative by Christian Brinkhoff and Bas van Kam, which is now available to download for free from this URL, which is on Christian Brinkhoff's website. And then we have the Go EUC website, which is now publishing a lot of research-based articles, like what's the scalability of the latest Windows 10 version, what kind of impact does SD-WAN have? So a lot of research-based articles showing differences between different editions of Citrix and different editions of Windows 10 and the scalability. And last but not least, we have the EUC Digest, which is a new podcast, which is available now. They've just recently started, but I have a couple of podcasts out now. I also recommend that you take a look at that as well if you're into podcasts. So, try to summarize, and it was kind of difficult, but the main thing that I see now moving forward is that, well, things are happening so fast. It's kind of hard to pay attention to everything. Of course, patching is going to be important, but looking into how we can make our environment more secure and combining and integrating the security tools that we have in our ecosystem is going to be crucial to actually handle those next big vulnerabilities that is going to hit our companies or enterprises. From an end user perspective, I think that's going to be make things a lot easier for us now, because we have more and more self-service functionality and more integrations from an identity perspective to provide single sign-on against multiple applications. Of course, from an IT admin perspective, it's going to be a lot more work, a lot more integrations that we need to build. But we also see now that a lot of vendors are building into virtual assistants and more chat-based interactions and publishing actions instead of applications. So I guess that like the future desktop service offering is going to be a set of virtual applications. We have some assistants. We have a zero trust-based security stack, combining this with MicroApps. So that's going to be, I'm guessing that's going to be a lot of the agenda for the next one that we have next year, hopefully. So, and with that, I come to the end of my session. Any other questions, James, that we need answering?
A couple more, mainly looking for your opinions, really. But the one that that says, is there still no support of app layering into Amazon Web Services? I thought you could do this, but I wasn't sure about it. Do you know?
Yeah, actually, I forgot to. Yeah, I think that now is supported. To be honest, I have to double check, but I think I read that is one of the release notes in one of the latest editions that they have.
Yeah, we were trying to enable the service for our workers in AWS on Citrix Cloud, and they said we couldn't do it, and they suggested just putting an ALM in there and kind of doing it the old-fashioned way. So I'm assuming they wouldn't have told me that if it wasn't supported. Otherwise, they'd done something very, very naughty. We've got a bit about talking about RDP being used for WVD, and is it an optimal protocol in your opinion for usage in a virtual desktop scenario?
Yeah, for me now, I see that the RDP protocol stack is, well, it's been a lot of development there over the last couple of years, especially in the latest release now, which is part of 2019. So I see that the RDP protocol is good enough. But in Windows Virtual Desktop settings, especially the way that Microsoft handles the traffic flow, it's good enough for traditional Office users. But if you have like GPU-based workloads or heavy workloads, I don't think it's good enough yet.
Right. There was also one very much at the start that I almost missed out on asking. What do you think about Citrix Hypervisor? Do you think that more customers will start using that rather than VMware, which I said, I thought VMware's probably got the lion's share, but have you seen any growth yourself around that?
Well, to be honest, I haven't. I see the battle ongoing now when we talk to customers about virtualization. It's more about hyperconverged infrastructure. And then we have the typical system, the usual suspects, which are Nutanix, which they're AHV, and we have VMware with vSAN, and we also have a couple of those cases using Azure Stack hyperconverged, which is running Hyper-V. So, to be honest, I haven't seen any Citrix Hypervisor customers in the last couple of years. But
Yeah,
again, it might not be that I'm not working directly with those types of customers.
as I say, there's a lot of VMware out there that I still say that you get the odd one on Citrix Hypervisor as well. I was actually just, from my own personal perspective, those virtual agents that Microsoft are putting in there into Azure, does that mean they're actually getting into the kind of the RPA kind of market, Microsoft, directly within Azure?
Yeah, so this is going to be direct competition with the big vendors, so UiPath and Blue Prism. And again, the benefit that Microsoft has is, of course, that even though their RPA solution might not be as good as the other big vendors in the market, but they have the ecosystem and all the different pre-built integrations that they have as part of Office 365. So yeah, they're definitely stepping into the RPA market because they see there's going to be a lot of, well, especially we see this in the Nordic countries. There's a lot of RPA consultant jobs now out here to actually meet the demand.
Yes, that's one thing I've noticed. There's, you said UiPath and Blue Prism. There was, sorry if you can hear my kids shouting in the background, I'll discipline them in a minute. There was another vendor whose name escapes me now, based out of the US, that had a really good one as well. But I think that is going to become a big growth area. So interesting to see Microsoft moving in there as well. I think that covers it all off. Got some good feedback in there, people saying thank you for that. So, yep, I think we're done on the question side.
Yeah, great. So I just want to mention lastly, if there are any questions that pop on into your head, feel free to reach out to me directly on Twitter and send me an email. I don't bite as hard as I should, and I don't have any coronavirus as of now, so I'm not contagious anyway. But feel free to reach out to me if you have any further questions. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Marius. Thank you, James. I just have one last little bit of business for you guys. It's the survey that I mentioned earlier. I'm popping it into the chat right now. Again, like I said, it's short and anonymous, and it's a great way for you to tell us what you think and also to give us ideas for future webinars. So love to have you fill that out. Just a reminder to follow us on Twitter. With everything that's going on right now, a lot of our local events are either being canceled or postponed. So the best thing for you to do is follow us on Twitter for the most recent updates. Also check our events calendar on the CUGC website, just so you know exactly what's happening. I know some of our local groups are still able to meet and some are not. So it's definitely changing minute by minute. So, while I was on this webinar, I was making some changes as we spoke. So definitely check us out and to stay up to date. And with that, I just want to thank Marius again for such a great presentation, and I definitely look forward to the blog post. I know, Marius, a couple people asked if the slide deck was going to be available. Is that something you are going to provide afterwards?
Yeah, I'll just have to update it to the 2020 template that you sent me a little bit first, so I don't feel
Okay.
guilty for that.
No problem. So we can include that with the link that goes out tomorrow for the webinar recording. And then also, I know you said you were going to write up something for the CUGC blog, so I'm looking forward to that. And with that, I just want to wish everyone, a great rest of your day wherever you are. Hope you all stay safe. Wash your hands. I hope everyone stays happy and healthy. And we will see you on the next CUGC webinar. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.